If you would like a free newsletter on this or other subjects, just give us a call at Christian Answers. The phone number is area code 512-218-8022. That's 512-218-8022. Or you could email us at cdebater@aol.com. That's cdebater@aol.com.
A discussion such as this will help people all across the spectrum, not just dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses, but with, let's say, the black Muslims who use the same arguments. The Mormons deny the Trinity and the deity of Christ in the sense that he's not part of the, since they're polytheists, they don't go along with the monotheism of the Scripture, and so forth. The Muslims, they deny that God has a son. They have real trouble with this passage I just read out of Matthew a while ago, the Son of the living God. In Islam, they don't believe that.
Well, any person who is talking with someone else and they have some sort of common basis in the Scriptures, this discussion will be for them, and specifically for Jehovah's Witnesses in this sense. And that is that Jehovah's Witnesses tend to be extremely closed-minded to any information that is contrary to the society's perspective. And if you can take their Bible, or a translation they will at least allow to be used, and demonstrate the deity of Christ to them. Almost every Jehovah's Witness that I've ever spoken to who left the society and was converted to Christ. There are many Jehovah's Witnesses, sadly to say, who have left the society and are now in a spiritual wasteland. They don't believe anything because they still accept the Watchtower's documentation that all the rest of man's religions are wrong, but now they found out the Watchtower isn't wrong, and therefore they don't believe in anything at all. They're just out there in a spiritual wasteland, and there are literally 1 million of these people since 1975. They're just out there, and they're not involved in any religious group at all, which is a terrible thing. But if you're talking to a person who's left the society and become a Christian, almost every single one of them will tell you that at some point in time they ran into a Christian who knew their Bible and was able to provide meaningful answers for the questions that they themselves had in regards to the person of Christ. And I really believe that God is honored when Christians in our land, when the cultists come to us, that we know the Word so well that we can provide a reason for the hope that's within us. And so what I want to do in dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses is I want to suggest some other directions to go in demonstrating the deity of Christ rather than just the classical passages. I'll give you an example. I do not suggest using John chapter 1, verse 1 at the beginning of a conversation with Jehovah's Witnesses, and there's a very simple reason why this is. As we know, the New World Translation of Jehovah's Witnesses mistranslates this passage. It says the word was a God, and you can go into all of that and may need to go into all of that eventually. But most Jehovah's Witnesses can respond to the citation of John 1:1 in a comatose state. In other words, they don't have to start thinking. They don't have to start interacting.
They're already expecting you to use the verb.
They're expecting it. They've heard it 1,000 times. They've responded to it 1,000 times. You're not starting any thinking process. Same with John chapter 10, verse 30. Mm-hmm. They'll refer you over to John chapter 17 so fast your head will spin, and you're not accomplishing anything. What I would like to try to suggest to people is a doctrine like the deity of Christ, being as it is taught all through the Scripture, allows for more than one way of demonstrating it. And I have found one particular way to be the best way to open the door, get the Jehovah's Witness thinking with you, examining the Scriptures with you, and then you can go to the classical passages. But there's another way to open the door to them. And that is to remember that for Jehovah's Witnesses, the name Jehovah and the person Jehovah is extremely important. And if you show familiarity with the name Jehovah, and I guess I should explain that name is a really Germanized but anglicized not even a translation, it's a mispronunciation of the divine name in the Old Testament, which in Hebrew is Yod-He-Waw-He, probably translated Yahweh, but has been rather mistranslated as Jehovah. But that's what they're familiar with using, and there's no reason to really argue with them about the particular pronunciation outside of certain areas. Anyways, they are very, very focused in upon that name Jehovah. Many of them think they're the only people who even know about the name Jehovah. They'd be very surprised to walk into your church and find you singing a song about Jehovah on a Sunday morning out of your hymnal. But since Jehovah is God to the individual witness, I would like to suggest to people that one of the most effective ways to getting the Jehovah's Witness to start following you and thinking with you is to start off by demonstrating that Jesus is identified as Jehovah by the Scriptures. And since the Watchtower Society has not been quite as sensitive to this perspective in the past, they have not had the opportunity of mistranslating the NWT to attempt to hide the references. And so you can utilize the NWT, and in fact, in one of the examples we're going to look at today, the center column references in the New World Translation itself, which were probably borrowed from other versions of the Bible other than the NWT.
Well, it had to be, because since none of them were Greek scholars, they simply took other translations and pieced it together the way they wanted it.
Yeah, and the center columns, the center column references, the cross-referencing system, I think pretty much was borrowed from someone else, because at a particular point we're going to look at later on, you will find that the center column reference will refer you back to the Old Testament passage that identifies Jesus as Jehovah, even in the NWT. So you can actually utilize their own
Also,
Bible.
under Greek interlinear, you can do that.
Yes, that's
in fact,
true.
I've got that marked out very clearly. In fact, their forward to their interlinear, I think it's page 18 if my memory serves me correct. I've done this so many times at Jehovah's Witness conventions, but their own forward shows that there are references there for Yahweh and Jehovah interlinked, I think, when it ties in with Philippians 2. But it's too complicated to explain now. But I'm just saying, you can, like you're saying, you can use Jehovah's Witness literature. There's so many references concerning the topic you're about to bring up on the deity of Christ, they couldn't hide them all.
Right,
They
exactly.
couldn't hide them
Exactly.
all. That's the key.
There are so many of them. And it's also, and this is something I haven't seen a lot of people using, when you identify Jesus as Jehovah, in the Watchtower person's mind, the Father is Jehovah. When you show the Son being identified as Jehovah, and then the Spirit is the Spirit of Jehovah, you can utilize this to help explain to them the name Jehovah is being used of the being of God shared by three persons, the Father, the Son, the Spirit, and they start to understand what the doctrine of the Trinity actually is. And so it's a two-pronged thing. It's very effective. Now, there are many, many passages that identify Jesus as Jehovah. I'm only going to talk about two, because they're the two that I think are the plainest, clearest, and if we just throw a lot of Bible verses out, some people just may become too much. But there are two that I use in talking with almost every Jehovah's Witness that I speak with about this subject. And the first one is to be found in Hebrews chapter 1. Mm-hmm. Hebrews chapter 1, actually the entire first chapter of Hebrews teaches the deity of Christ from verse 2, of course, verse 6, let all the angels of God worship him. The NWT attempts to hide that by when they encounter the Greek term proskuneo in the New Testament, whenever it's used of the Father, they translate it worship. When it's used of the Son, they now translate duobeisance too.
They used to, in their older translations,
used to say worship.
It still says worship. That
Yes.
caused them so much grief, they've now
changed it to duobeisance. That's correct. But even verse 8, but to the Son he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. They have the translation, God is your throne. So they've done their best to attempt to hide the references to the deity of Christ here in Hebrews chapter 1. But there wasn't anything they could do about the most startling reference to the deity of Christ in Hebrews chapter 1. And that's because it begins at verse 10. I'm going to read from the New King James Version, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 10. And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain, and they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak you will fold them up, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not fail. Now, when you read this in context, this passage is being applied to the Son. Verse 8 had said, but to the Son he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions. And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth. Verse 10. So it is very plainly about the person of Jesus Christ.
If you like our YouTube channel, please subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button, and then by also clicking the bell above to get an automatic update whenever we produce another YouTube video for our See Answers TV channel. Please share our videos with your friends and relatives. May God bless you. Only one life will soon be passed. Only what is done for Christ will last. See related videos by tapping or clicking screens.